We all have a visceral memory of 9/11. How we found out, how we reacted, what we felt. I was an undergraduate at the time, and I was in the gym. I was on the elliptical watching the news report of the smoke billowing from the first tower as the second plane hit. In that particular semester, I was taking a class on religion and politics. And on that particular day, we read from a book called Terror in the Mind of God by Mark Juergensmeyer about the relationship between religion and violence. The particular chapter of that book that we had assigned on September 11th was a case study on the first attack on the World Trade Center, the 1993 bombing. Before walking into class, I didn't really have a sense of how seismic that day really was. But walking out, it was clear to me that the world in which I came of age had just experienced a profound shift. Violence of the 20th century was largely defined by secular nationalist motivations. Stalin, Mao, Hitler. Religion was not their tool. The 21st century, however, initiated with 9/11, shifted us into a world where violence and totalitarianism come dressed in religious garb. It would be easy to reduce this problematic trend into a problem with Islam. I do think it's appropriate to note that Islam has a particularly poignant internal battle right now between the extremists and the moderates, each who want to claim the soul of the religion to the exclusion of the other. But to put the problem of violence or evil carried out in the name of religion only on Islam ignores a fundamental trait of religion as a whole. As Rabbi Daniel Hartman, a contemporary pluralistic Orthodox scholar, claims in his book on understanding religious violence, religion as a whole is susceptible to what he calls an autoimmune disease. A disease in which the immune system, which is designed to fight off external threats, instead attacks and destroys one's own healthy cells and tissues. What he's saying is that the beauty of religion, community, fervor, the values, these positive attributes can get twisted and redirected. And that which ought to be mobilized for good becomes the tool for carrying out evil. Yes, Islam has a more poignant struggle right now with an autoimmune disease. But to dismiss this as a Muslim problem and a Muslim problem alone, it blinds us to our own vulnerability. Hartman claims that as Jews, we're often self-congratulatory about our record of tolerance and compassion towards others, pointing to 2 millennia of diaspora life and our support for religious freedom and coexistence. For much of history, however, we were a powerless people, and a powerless people is almost always a moral one, as self-interest positions one on the side of the downtrodden. We could point out the flaws in our sister monotheistic faiths, but I fear that this is counterproductive if our goal is to eradicate extremism from the world. Why? Because the greatest agents of change are usually not external voices of critique. They are insiders who want their community to be the best version of itself. Pointing to Islam, the whole religion, is troublesome. On a purely pragmatic level, we're not going to make a religion of 1.3 billion people disappear. And our attack on the whole religion serves to alienate those Muslims who share our vision for a more peaceful world. We force our Muslim allies to defend their tradition instead of creating a space for them to take on the extremists in their midst. But this sermon is not about how we relate to the Muslim community. This sermon is about how we relate to our own. It is not enough to support voices of moderation in other faith communities. Our most effective tool, one that we all have access to in this new era of religious violence, is our own ability to model the religious moderation that we seek from others. It's no accident that on one of our holiest days of the year, we see Abraham at his worst. His faith blinds him in his willingness to sacrifice his son Isaac. As Hartman claims, he doesn't consider his moral responsibility towards his son, nor does he debate whether to adhere to the divine commandment not to murder. The conversation never reaches that point because there is no conversation. God intoxication has already compromised his faculties. Where's the Abraham who argued to save Sodom for the sake of 10 righteous souls? Where's the Abraham who's willing to hold God accountable? It's a reminder that piety is no guarantee for right action. Quite the opposite. Faith can obscure morality. So if that's the case, that faith can lead us astray just as much as it can lead us to righteousness, why are you here? Why are you sitting in shul? You certainly don't need Torah to tell you that stealing and murder are wrong. You have a conscience. You know what's right. You don't need your rabbi to tell you that you should give charity. You can figure that out. Rabbi Harold Schulweiss notes that each of us is equipped with an innate sense of morality. We might not always get it right. We might be limited to our historical context, but it's the best tool that we have. The purpose of religion is not to determine the moral good in the first place, as Danielle Hartman expands. Rather, religion reminds us of what we already know. Its primary role is to condition us to overcome the most significant cause of moral mediocrity, which is not a lack of knowledge. It's a weakness of character. When religion is doing its job, it fills the role of moral mentor, reminding its adherents to check their self-interest and become people who see others, who cannot remain indifferent, and who define their religious identities as agents of moral good. You don't need Judaism to tell you what's right. You can figure that out. What each and every one of us needs, however, is to be held accountable. We need to be pushed and prodded to be our best versions of ourselves, to stand in a community that is actively trying to do the same. There's a profound power that comes in communal accountability. And that's a good reason for you to be sitting here in shul today. If we're going to succeed at holding ourselves ethically and morally accountable, then we need to hold our religion ethically and morally accountable as well. As Reformed Jews, we have made the choice to embrace the authority to look upon our tradition and call it out when we see injustice or misogyny or violence. We cannot ignore the aspects of our tradition that perpetuate these things. If we do, someone else will come along and claim that injustice and violence are essential and right. You and I, when we look at the book of Esther on Purim, we might see it as a funny biblical book about Jews overcoming our foolish foes. Baruch Goldstein saw that text as a justification for revenge. It's okay to kill Persian bystanders then in the book of Esther. It must be okay for us to kill Palestinian bystanders today. Goldstein used our text as a justification to open fire on a mosque and kill 29 people on Purim. Do I have to look back all the way to the 1990s to find an act of terror perpetuated by Jews like this? I do. Like I said, Judaism may not currently struggle with extremism to the same degree as Islam does. But as Jews, we are not immune. The battle that we face in our society today around religious violence is not a battle of Islam versus the West. It is a battle for the soul of religion as a whole. Plenty of new atheists see the violence carried out in the name of religion and diagnose the whole endeavor as failed. No religion is perfect. Religion is like democracy. It must be guarded and nurtured and protected to fulfill its purpose of adding meaning, compassion, and justice in the world. It is flawed, but that does not mean that it is useless. Rabbi Brad Hirschfield points out that all the arguments about losing faith after seeing one's faith, seeing the terrible face of one's faith, seem like me to deciding to eat only raw food after you turn on a burner and accidentally burn the house down. Faith is a fire that burns inside of us, and it can be used for good and for ill. If we cede the soul of religion to extremists, then the new atheists are right. Religion is a scourge that should be eradicated. It is a dangerous fire that must be extinguished. Instead, I would hope that our voices are powerful enough to drown out those who misuse the fire of faith. It is on us to stake our claim as representatives of religion that are more authentic than the extremists who claim authenticity. This summer, a billboard appeared in Chicago that read, "Hey ISIS, you suck," from #ActualMuslims. I love this. Now, many of my colleagues and friends in my interfaith circles would say that it's a shame that all Muslims are held accountable for the actions of a few. That would be like making average Muslims denounce ISIS is like making Christians feel accountable for denouncing the KKK. Well, guess what? I think that moderate Muslims should denounce ISIS, and we should listen to them when we do. I also think that moderate Christians should denounce the KKK. And yes, I think that moderate Jews should denounce extremism that we see in our midst, whether it comes in the form of gender discrimination, American Jewish organizations, or in price tag attacks on Arabs in the West Bank. It does not serve us to point out which group is struggling to fight extremism more. If you're fighting extremism and violence, you are on the same side. To be a voice of self-critique in your own faith community, it's not an act of betrayal. It can be the most profound act of love. In one Talmudic story, there's a group of rabbis who go against God in a ruling that they make. When God protests, they respond that God's out of luck because God gave us authority. It's in our hands now. And God responds to this incident joyfully with a really striking phrase. God says, "My children have made me eternal." The act of making sure that our tradition does not become stuck or ossified or backward, that is an act of making God eternal. That is why I am a Reformed Jew. I often see Reformed Jews cede authority to people who are more religious. For the love of God, don't do this. You make conscious religious choices about your observance to navigate the modern world, choices that balance traditional insights and contemporary values. Own that. Own that with pride. That is an act of love for your Judaism. And don't be afraid to speak out in the name of your Jewish values. Your tradition will evolve because of it. Because if you don't, somebody with different values, somebody who does not see pluralism and inclusion and openness as central to the religion, they will claim the center of religion. Show the world that you are the face of religiosity. Not the bigots, not the terrorists. Our greatest asset to fighting the extremism that we see in the world is to become vocal, proud moderates who claim the authority of our tradition as moderates. As Hartman claims, to save religion from itself is to understand that I have a choice. It's not a choice between the sanctification of all that is given, despite its corruption, and the rejection of all that is given, despite its profound value. The choice is rather to walk within my tradition, with my God, to hear the word and be inspired and instructed by it, and at all times, to judge it. So on this new year, in a world defined by terror carried out in the name of religion, this is the blessing I give us all. May our loving voices that hold our tradition accountable help reveal the most beautiful, moral, and ethical core of Judaism. May all the loving voices of self-critique help us shape religion to reflect the love that is at its core. And in the words of Rabbi Brad Hirschfeld, may religious traditions exist not to serve the faithful, but for the faithful to help serve the world. Shana Tova.